must speak the truth about terror. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves.
What happens? I tell you what happens. Blam!
I have a window that looks directly at the World Trade Center, and I saw...
No delusion!
Shit's getting way too complicated for me.
Welcome to this Antedote Deepcore Text. This is Greg McCarran.
And this is Jeremy Rothkushel.
Today we are going to be doing part 3 of our Deepcore Text series centered around the relationship between Israel and China. And we just finished reading from in our first 2 volumes excerpts, portions of, and commenting on Seeds of Fire, China and the Story Behind the Attack on America by Gordon Thomas. And this time we're going to be moving into a new text. And Jeremy, you want to give the title?
Yeah, and Martin Dillon was a co-author on... You're right. He was not a co-author on Seeds of Fire.
Okay.
I apologize for that. So this new book that we're going to deal with is called Israel and China, From Silk Road to Innovation Highway by Lionel Friedfeld and Philippe Metoudi. And the subtitle here is Understanding Asia's Relationship with the Jewish State. And I imagine this will be, as you said, this will be our third deep core text on Israel and China. And we can envision at least 2 more segments on this. Hopefully this segment will lead us off heading towards a deeper exploration of the contemporary moment in terms of high technology, specifically questions of surveillance technology, technology of occupation, as you might call it in an Israeli state context in relationship to their long-term military occupation of the Palestinian people. And then that would be the next segment potentially that this would lead into. And then maybe we would begin to wrap it up towards understanding the large geopolitical context, the framework of these technologies globally under the banner of the War on Terror. And as we approach this 20th anniversary of September 11th, then read some of these coming texts in relationship to that framework.
All right. Well, we'll get into the text here shortly. But first of all, I'd like to provide a bit of an update on where we stand, the Antidote, in terms of our media outreach and the platforms we're on. As right now, we're beginning to really get more targeted, it seems, for strikes on YouTube. And we have deducted that these strikes related to on a couple of different videos we've done. As a result, we're not able to haven't been able to post for the last week and a half, and I'm not sure how long we're going to be able to go without posting. But we feel we've looked through some of the strikes and the reasons given for it, and we believe that they're not exactly the most fair. And so we've been working on appeal on those in the future. But for right now, as far as our platforms go, we're currently working on backing up our programs onto this alternative. It's called Library. And what is the Library?
Odyssey,
also known as Library. I believe that Library is transitioned over to Odyssey, Odyssee, and it's kind of it's not quite a YouTube backup. How would you describe it?
No, I think, Library is a more macro project that's basically a crypto, a blockchain approach to things like information systems and social media platforms. And so I believe that's the way it is. And so the Odyssey is their open blockchain approach to a YouTube alternative.
Okay, so we're pretty much got, I think, most all of our material, with maybe a few exceptions, is on Odyssey now. We'll have to check and see there might be a few things missing. We'll have to check on those. But in addition to that, we're starting to transition into the process of getting the Antidote available on more of your typical RSS, your more typical streaming services.
Podcasting streaming service, yeah.
Yes. In terms of your general go-to places for podcasts. And in addition to that, we still have our Patreon page running, and we're working to basically right now is with YouTube uncertain. That's been the definitely been like the go-to for like the vast majority of our audience here over the past 5 years. I can't believe we're approaching 5 years. I mean, it seems pretty wild, but I will come back to that in September. But just right now, looking for ways, we're right now we're in a bit of a transition period, although I think we're in a pretty good place right now, but just about keeping a combination of keeping as much, the core audience that we have that is primarily through YouTube, combined with just continuing to put out as much material as we can to as big and as an audience as possible. So right now we're working on that. And so in this transition period, there'll be a little bit of bearing with this if you're not hearing it as much from us on, the platforms you usually used to hearing from us at. So just in a transition period right now, but I feel like we're in a pretty good place on this. Just a matter of, stepping up the professionalism on our end, which has been something that we've dealt with from day one. But I feel like we have really come a long way in 4 years. We still have a long way to go on that, but I feel pretty good right now. And so, it's just a matter of us keeping putting material out while figuring out, like, with this vast archive that we have, and keeping the audience that's in play, those of you who listen to us, and so I feel like we're in a good place right now, Jeremy.
Well, yeah, and as you said, it's the end of the first 5 years of the Antedote, and there is a certain amount of a cycle of completion, I would say, in relationship to our ongoing analysis. And so now we're at this point of where we are beginning to do things that we've been looking into and made starts on, and likely should have progressed more earlier in terms of questions of actual podcasts, RSS feeds. I'm sure that there's, significant portions of our current audience, and then definitely portions of people who are not aware of our work and research, who would very likely get the most direct source of it from actual podcast feeds and RSS feeds. So we're looking into that. We're open to feedback also from our existing audience out there, both those who have more recently found our work, or those who are aware of us from years back and have participated in our research. And so definitely keep an eye on our Patreon page. We urge you to go support us there if you can. And then also give us some feedback in terms of different areas where you think we could be best in terms of reaching both our current audience, and then to expand into audiences that might be very interested in our work. And we're also then interested in things like an email list, developing an email list so we could actually put out more written content to our audience. And so anybody who has ideas about that, whether they think things like Substack or Gumroad or any kinds of things like that, we're open to those possibilities. But meanwhile, most of the YouTube channel has already been backed up to Odyssey via in relationship to library, as Greg said, and then we have reinitiated the RSS feed, and Greg is uploading our podcast now via Anchor, that will then reach a lot of the podcast streaming networks too. And then meanwhile, we're interested in anybody who has interest in potentially helping us in like editing short videos, and helping us push them out to different platforms, and that kind of stuff. All right. So that's the state of affairs. We have stuff that we, as you said, Greg, that still has not been able to be uploaded to YouTube because of our strike, and then ongoing removals of videos that have begun happening in the last few weeks. All right. Any last comments on the state of our channel affairs, Greg, before we get into Israel and China?
Not really. It's just a matter of just bearing with us as we get a few things on our end sorted out and put together. But definitely just going to keep on putting out volumes of work as often as we get the chance to. And so just bear with us, and we are definitely 5 years coming up, man. It's definitely been quite it's been something else being doing the antidote for 5 years, but definitely we've got a lot of stuff coming up with 20 years of September 11th anniversary, right back at the forefront of the center of the things that we started, the reasons we started this podcast, and a lot of reasons for the evolution, the evolving of our stance on things, the way we present information over the years. And so definitely a lot coming. So I do feel like we are ultimately in a pretty good place compared to where we could be right now in terms of like our archive of information and prospects and possibilities for the future. So without further ado, Jeremy, if you're ready, let's get into volume 3 of China, Israel.
All right. So we will be reading from Israel and China from Silk Road to Innovation Highway by Lionel Friedfeld and Philippe Metoudi, subtitled Understanding Asia's Relationship with the Jewish State. Okay, we're going to start with Chapter 3, pages 43 through 49. Quote, Chapter 3, Creation of the State of Israel and Evolution of the Israeli-Asian Relationship since the 1950s. A rich common history has reinforced the deep bonds between Israel and Asian countries. As this chapter illustrates, a unique, multifaceted political, military, economic, and cultural relationship has evolved over the years. Asian influence on pre-independence Israel, the Burma Road in Jerusalem. During World War II, the quote-unquote Burma Road, which linked Burma to southwest China, proved a vital corridor for providing supplies to help China resist Japan. In 1948, during Israel's War of Independence, leading figures, including future Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, Amos Horev, a key operational officer and future president of the Technion Institute of Technology, and General Mickey Marcus, were inspired to build a similar road to break the Arab blockade of Jerusalem. Okay, well, a quick aside here. I just want to point out that in the future, when we get more to the contemporary high technology aspects of this, the Technion was just mentioned here. And it turns out that not only one of the co-founders of Qualcomm is a very big long-term Israeli partisan supporter of the Israeli state and its technology apparatus. But the other co-founder of Qualcomm is actually has a deep, maybe even a deeper relationship with Technion. He is from a Jewish Italian background, and we'll cover that more later. And of course, Qualcomm crucial to chipsets in relationship to handheld devices, smart devices, and all of that. So I just wanted to put some focus again on the Technion as this crucial place, as a connector globally. Okay, back to the text, page 43 of Israel and China from Silk Road to Innovation Highway. Quote, Jerusalem's equivalent was constructed within a few weeks, passing through hills and mountains in several locations. Today, Moshav Bekoa, Bait Jiz, Bait Susin Kibbutz Harel, Bait Meir, to connect to the old Jerusalem road. After its completion, the besieged Jewish population of Jerusalem was able to receive critical supplies. Israel and Burma continued to entertain strong ties during the 1950s. The original Burma Road in Jerusalem, or part of it, has been preserved for historical walks and educational purposes. Recognition of Israel by Asian countries. In May 1949, a year after its independence, Israel was admitted as a member of the United Nations, having declared independence 1 year earlier. Asian countries recognized the State of Israel fairly early and established diplomatic relationships accordingly. The Republic of China recognized Israel in March 1949, and although Israel recognized the People's Republic of China, PRC, in January 1950, official diplomatic relationships were established only in January 1992. Israel was recognized by the Philippines in May 1949, by India in September 1950, by Thailand in September 1950, by Japan in May 1952, by Burma in July 1953, by Laos in February 1957, by Cambodia in August of 1960, by the Republic of Korea in April 1962, by Singapore in May 1969, and by Vietnam in July 1993. Indonesia has not yet officially recognized the state of Israel, although Israelis can travel in the territory with an invitation from the Ministry of Immigration, and large Israeli companies operate discreetly in the country. And there's pictures on these pages of the construction of the Burma Road in Israel 1948, and then the front page of the Palestine Post, Israel 1948, State of Israel is Born, the title of that. Okay, we're on page 45 now of Israel and China from Silk Road to Innovation Highway by Lionel Friedfeld and Philippe Metoudi. Understanding Asia's relationship with the Jewish state. Quote, evolution of Israel and Asian relationships since the 1950s. China. In January 1950, Israel was the first country in the Middle East to recognize the People's Republic of China, PRC. During the 1950s, Israel and the PRC nourished political and trade dialogues. High-level meetings were organized both at political and trade levels. In 1954, an Israeli delegation led by Israeli politician David Hakohen and members of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Asian Department met with China's Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Zhang Hanfu, and the Director of the Asian and African Department, Huang Huao. Although the 1960s and 70s saw a lull in relations, the relation revived in the 1980s. Israel began to provide China with defense and military equipment. Trade, notably in technology and initially via Hong Kong, started to boom. Unquote. An aside here, just remember that, and we'll return to this when we begin to cover this angle from the September 11th angle and go back to the question of Shaul Eisenberg as a central figure, both in allegations surrounding September 11th, but also in relationship between Israel and the entirety of the Asian sphere and his central role in probably what's just explained there, the uptick of Chinese-Israeli relations in the 1980s, as I believe the trip, the more covert trip that Eisenberg, I believe, helped initiate was at the end of the 70s, maybe in 1979. So we will cover that a little bit more later. Back to the text. Quote, in 1985, China admitted Israeli scholars to conferences and symposia. Reciprocally, Chinese scholars started visiting Israel. A direct dial telephone system was established between the two countries in 1986. Israeli tourists were allowed to travel in China. A delegation of the Communist Party visited Israel in 1987, and Israel's Prime Minister Shimon Peres appointed Amos Yudan to set up the first Hong Kong-based Israeli government-affiliated company to encourage commercial activity between Israel and China. A year later, a delegation of the Israel Labor Party visited China. The formal establishment of diplomatic relations with Israel in 1992 resulted in a dramatic increase in ties between China and Israel in various political, commercial, and cultural fields. Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Arens visited China in 1991 and negotiated the expansion of military cooperation between the two countries. Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs David Levy visited China in 1992. He appointed Zev Sufotz as Israel's first ambassador to China and Dan Katarivas, previously based in Hong Kong, as economic counselor of the Israeli embassy in Beijing. In the 2000s, the Israel-China relationship continued to strengthen. The visit of Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert to China in 2007 further boosted trade and military cooperation. In May 2013, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu traveled to China to consolidate and further expand the country's cooperation and, in return, Chinese Foreign Minister Huang Yi visited Israel that December. Shimon Peres, by then president of the State of Israel, visited China in April 2014 and met with President Xi Jinping. Unquote. Just a quick aside here. I just want to point out that the current reporting about the NSO group, Pegasus Software, is also beginning to show a lot of what we've been tracking and elucidating on this channel, especially when we were talking about the Talpiot program, when we dealt with how the Talpiot program works, when we exposed that Netanyahu during his interview with Mark Levin had basically explained his direct reasoning and the background for the implementation of global Talpiot, but more in a bigger way than just the Talpiot program, which is just one of many programs and a larger strategy of the Israeli security state, and in this case Netanyahu specifically, to use their technology as a carrot and a stick in terms of a question of kill switch diplomacy on the back end as the covert enforcer, sort of their next generation of the Samson option, but then also the civilian sector carrots of technology that it does not imply as much of a potential weaponization of it. And what Netanyahu explained was this multifaceted approach. But the main thing was that he said he was using the technology to gain the support of countries around the world that would ultimately pay off in things like the UN assembly, right? And then what's being directly reported on in terms of this NSO and the Pegasus software and how widely it was distributed, that resonates very much with this exploration is that it shows that as Netanyahu visited certain countries, the implementation of NSO and Pegasus would follow directly behind or almost concomitantly or sort of like lead up to his visit. For example, when Orban in Hungary started when they started using the Pegasus software, it was almost concurrently with Netanyahu's visit with Orban and visit to Hungary. And multiple other countries, you see it directly in the wake of Netanyahu's visit. Then, bam, the Pegasus switches get turned on. That software is delivered, and then they can utilize it. And so there's a couple things there. One, of course, is that this idea that the NSO is just some kind of corporate, totally independent entity from the Israeli government, rather than at the very least a tool of technology utilized by the highest levels of the Israeli government, is shown to be not true. And then secondly, you would have to see too that this is directly being utilized by Netanyahu himself in the wake of these visits. And then in the background, a final point that I just thought of too is that what we are beginning to find out too, which we already knew really, was that the way that NSO Pegasus would work is just like the Promise software. All of these technologies that are being supplied via some corporate Israeli military intelligence cutout to countries around the world is also backdoored, and that in this case of Pegasus, they openly say that they at some level know how it's being used, and as we know, the NSO group sets up these sites that are then become the implementation vectors for some of this spyware, right? And so I guess what I'm implying is that Netanyahu, as he goes and visits these countries, there's obviously a direct diplomatic implication there, but there's also a back-end espionage implication there that feeds back into the kill switch diplomacy stick side of all of this, and that Israel is collecting all of this information as it distributes spyware to other countries to use. And so that's a crucial thing to consider too, in relationship to this the evolving relationship between Israel and China. And as we'll see, things like where in the book A Startup Nation by Dan Senor, key figure actually in terms of Paul Singer and the setting up of this whole nature of this relationship of using the startup nation and the pushing of these Israeli-born corporations as a way to protect against boycott, divestment, sanctions by riddling the sector with so much Israeli technology that it becomes virtually impossible to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel at the high technology level by the time that the public will gets to it, is what it looks like. And in Dan Senor's book that he co-wrote about the Startup Nation, it discloses that 90% of Chinese telecommunications infrastructure, at least that's at the point that the book was written, was based on Israeli technology. And then what we know now too, in terms of NSO and circles, is that it often will utilize Israeli back-end technology. For example, circles, which is related to NSO Group, is works on a back end of Israeli military intelligence checkpoint software firewalls that are used to this day around the world in more legacy-based telecommunication systems, which is then how this Circles software bounces off of it or utilizes these checkpoint firewalls as a locus from which to launch man-in-the-middle attacks against people who are potentially utilizing a more legacy system in terms of their communication. So things like text messaging protocol is very vulnerable to that relationship between the long installed Israeli military intelligence, Talpiot veteran founded checkpoint firewall, and also remember the former head of Jewish Voice for Peace, married to a man who worked with checkpoint technologies, but that as the hardware backend for then this newer generation of espionage, spyware, software implementations from NSO Pegasus to Circles to then operate off of these more long-term legacy hardware Israeli military intelligence installed systems, which goes way, way back, and you'll have to then deal with all of the blooming of certain aspects of modern telecommunications technology in, for example, the Rad Group and the Zisapel brothers and the entirety of all of these companies that sprout out from that. And so there's a lot for us to deal with on this high technology front, both looking back and contemporaneously at this moment right now, that we will continue to do. But I just wanted to point out that visit that was just talked about of Netanyahu to China in May of 2013 is, I believe, probably a crucial moment in terms of a contemporaneous amping up of this technology relationship between China and Israel. So we could look for that.
Yeah, and I'll comment on that. Is that when you're reading through that, you're discussing, like, talking about the this nature of, like, the building over time and the strengthening, it seems like, of this relationship over time, and all the Netanyahu quotes from what we covered about Talpiot about using the carrot and the stick approach, lure of technology and economic progress. And I was thinking, we've been talking about this among ourselves, and we might actually cover this at some point in the future. This recent interview with Joe Rogan and Abby Martin, where they're talking about U.S. military power and military power, and Joe Rogan mentions to Abby China, and Abby kind of like it's just in this more than once mentions, well, China only has one military base, and that's in Djibouti. And so, thinking about this, though, we got to remember that this type of power that is being wielded on a global scale is so much more than just traditional military power. It's economic power. It's technological power. Obviously, this intersectionality of economics and technology here. I mean, in a lot of ways, it seems like it's in the modern age, in this current age, it might even be more overtly, directly influential and consequential than just direct military power, which of course has been how like the empires and the world powers of the past have operated. Thinking about that, it's like it goes so far just beyond like traditional military power in all of this. And so that was definitely something to think about. You talk about things like China or maybe Russia or a combination of both those countries, along with, say, Israel and their influence in places like that. It goes so far than just beyond like traditional military bases and all this. And everybody loves to point out, America has all these military bases, basically is like, has its military operating throughout the world. And yes, that's true, but like it goes so far beyond that. And then you have this conjunction of economics, of technology, and then with the changing face of warfare, which seems to be a combination of economic power, technological power, and this is something, of course, that comes into play with like China as it relates to Xinjiang province, and something we'll get into in a future installment of the Antedote Deepcore Text. The transition seems from like nationalistic military powers, like these big corporate armies, basically. So it's so much more than just traditional military power as we know it. So like, China, these countries like, well, no, maybe they don't have like the direct overt military influence globally that the U.S. does, but there are so many other ways of exerting this power and influence. These are just a couple of primary examples of that.
That's a great point. And we will, and we need to return to really dissecting that Joe Rogan, Abby Martin interview. There's a few key nodal points that will help explain the current information moment, in especially sense of who Joe Rogan is and what he represents, and then who Abby Martin is and what she represents. And I think you're crucially correct, Greg, in that that main thing that Abby is pushing that's so wrong around that answer to the China issue, and how we only need to deal with the American military and the American empire because that we're the only ones who have all these bases around the world. Clearly, from an American perspective, as we've always said, that's our primary duty as patriots of conscience, is to course correct our own country. At the same time, you're exactly correct in that especially 21st century, and as we pointed out, that even moving into the Trump years, that the clean break wars, where a lot of the sort of real hyperactive hot war of the clean break wars, the 9/11 wars, the war on terror, had largely been wrapped up to some extent by the time Trump begins to ascend to office. And so the combination of that with that we are now living in this cyber war era, that what you're saying is so crucial. So then this relationship of China to the technology of occupation, the post 9/11 technological landscape, surveillance, cyber weaponry, questions of kill switch diplomacy, and then specifically this deep relationship with the central national character, credibly accused in relationship to being the fixed point of September 11th itself, is Israeli military intelligence. The commanding heights of that entire operation is crucial to unpack. And so we'll continue to do that. And I think you're also correct, Greg, that understanding the contemporary moment of warfare as much more hybridized, as hybrid warfare, so that it would not only include obviously direct military, but it would also not only include even cyber war and cyber tools and cyber weapons, but also very much include, as has been the case throughout even the Cold War, economic tools of power. The use of economics as warfare, economic warfare, And China is not above that, obviously, too. And so that, I think, you make some crucial points there, and we will return to that. And that's why we're trying to set the table with some of this just baseline historical material from, mainstream sources they might be thought of, and a book such as Israel and China, From Silk Road to Innovation Highway by Lionel Friedfeld and Philippe Metoudi, Understanding Asia's Relationship with the Jewish State. All right, so we'll go back to this. We're almost finished with this section of reading, and then we'll skip to the next chapter. Okay, we're on page 46. Quote, over the past 20 years, trade between Israel and China has skyrocketed to an estimated U.S. $9 billion in 2014 from U.S. $50 million in 1992. China is Israel's largest trading partner in Asia and the second largest in the world after the United States. Israel provides China with technology and innovation expertise, specifically in the fields of water, irrigation, desalination, agriculture technologies, renewable energy, cybersecurity, internet, telecom, digital media, and healthcare. China provides Israel with numerous manufactured goods. At an anecdotal level, evidence of the burgeoning relationship is evident. During the author's first trips to Israel with Chinese investors, it was obvious that even five-star hotels did not cater to Chinese clients. Israeli breakfasts are abundant and luxurious, but definitely have nothing in common with Chinese breakfasts. Hummus, for example, is delicious, but has never been part of a Chinese traditional breakfast. Recently, the same hotels have created new sections in their huge buffets dedicated specifically to Chinese-style food and preferences. Interestingly, one of the descendants of the Kadoorie family living in Israel, Hila Solomon, who specializes in hosting leading politicians and executives in Jerusalem, is now known among Chinese VIPs as one of the best caterers in the city. Similarly, requests to serve hot water for our Chinese visitors would initially be greeted with incomprehension. Today, the majority of hotel restaurants often put a pot of hot water on the meal table for Chinese guests. Unquote. End of that section. All right, moving on. And I think that point at the end there is very telling and interesting because, of course, that's how business happens, is in human relations. And so the Kadoorie family that was just mentioned, crucial player in terms of Zionist relations and more specifically Jewish power relations with the East over a longer period of time. So that's an interesting mention there. And to see the quick evolution of the basics of hospitality from the Israeli sphere to Chinese business interests is, I think, a crucial data point actually to the nature of this evolving and deepening relationship, which is then proven out on things that are much more overtly seen in the business headlines, such as a Chinese company to take over and finance the I believe the Israeli port in, I think it was Haifa actually. And so that's a big deal, right? All right. Page 61 of Israel and China, From Silk Road to Innovation Highway by Lionel Friedfeld and Philippe Metoudi. Understanding Asia's Relationship with the Jewish State. Chapter 4, quote, Israel's DNA, Science, Technology, and Innovation. Nurturing Innovation. Research, science, technology, and innovation have characterized the modern history of the Jewish people, particularly the early settlers who came to the Holy Land before the establishment of the State of Israel. With scarce resources and a challenging climate and environment, scientific innovation has been used as a tool to enhance the lives of Israel's citizens. The first Israeli research institutions were created in the fields of agronomy and agriculture. Unquote. An aside, remember, this is also how someone like Arnon Milchan gets his start, is in these fields of agriculture technology. Back to the text, page 61 of Israel and China, From Silk Road to Innovation Highway. Quote, the first Israeli research institutions were created in the fields of agronomy and agriculture. Mikveh Israel School was inaugurated in 1870 by the Alliance Israelite Universelle, an agriculture research organization, was founded in 1921 in Rehovot. The same pioneer spirit has nurtured Israeli research and innovation over the decades. With its leading universities, research institutions, and elite military units, Israel has become an internationally recognized powerhouse in technology and innovation. Leading Israeli universities and research institutions. Okay, so this section will then lay out, so we begin to be grounded in the landscape of the Israeli high technology research institutional network. Quote, Technion Institute of Technology. The Technion Institute of Technology is Israel's oldest university. It was created in 1912 with the help of the German Ezra Fund, as many Jews were not allowed to access universities and science courses in Europe. In 1923, Albert Einstein, the distinguished physicist who developed the theory of relativity, visited the Technion in Haifa and served as the first president of the Technion Society. The following year, the Technion opened its doors to students. The Technion's numerous faculties included aerospace engineering, architecture and town planning, biology, biomedical engineering, biotechnology and food engineering, civil and environmental engineering, chemical engineering, chemistry, computer science education and technology and science, electrical engineering, humanities and arts, industrial engineering and management, material sciences and engineering, mathematics, mechanical engineering, medicine, and physics. The institute has over 14,000 students, with more than 9,500 undergraduates, 2,400 postgraduates, 1,000 doctoral students, and 52 research centers. The Technion established a technology transfer bureau, Technion Technology Transfer, T3, in 2007 to commercialize in-house research to investors. In 2010, the Technion won a bid to establish a science and engineering school at Cornell University in the United States. In 2013, with the help of Li Ka-shing Foundation, it established an Institute of Technology with Shantou University in China. The Technion Institute of Technology regularly ranks among the top 50 universities in the world, especially for chemistry, computer science, mathematics, natural sciences, and engineering. 4 Technion faculty members have received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry: Avram Hershko and Aaron Sichanover, 2004, Dan Shechtman, 2011, and Ari Warshel, 2013. Technion alumni include numerous entrepreneurs and CEOs of Israeli and international firms, such as Dadi Perlmutter, Chief Product Officer of Intel, Abraham Lempel and Jacob Ziv, developers of the Lempel-Ziv LWZ compression algorithm, Andy Gutmans, developer of PHP and co-founder of Zen Technologies. As an aside here, I believe that in PHP, I believe is a coding language, actually. And I think Facebook was originally coded a lot in PHP. So that's just an aside. That's what I remember. That may be incorrect. Okay, back to the text, page 62 of Israel and China, From Silk Road to Innovation Highway. Quote, Yehuda and Zohar Zisapel, co-founders of the RAD Group and patrons of the Israeli high-tech industry, and Yoel Ma'arek, a founder of Google Israel and CEO of Yahoo Labs Israel. Both the Iron Dome missile defense system and the ReWalk robotic exoskeleton that enables paraplegics to walk are innovations of Technion alumni. Hebrew University. The Hebrew University was founded in 1918 and opened in 1925. The university's first board of governors included Albert Einstein, Sigmund Freud, known as the father of psychoanalysis, the philosopher Martin Buber, and Chaim Weizmann, who later became the first president of Israel. Unquote. And aside here, remember, Chaim Weizmann, I believe, deeply connected to the alleged fifth man of the Kim Philby Cambridge Soviet spy circle of Victor Rothschild. The background relationship of Victor Rothschild and Chaim Weizmann in helping set up the, especially the post-World War II amplification of the Israeli high technology research network. And Victor Rothschild, we're going to have to do a whole Antedote Deepcore Text on the book about, I think it's by Roland Perry, about Victor Rothschild and his alleged role as this missing piece to the Cambridge spy ring and what that all, again, means. We've already dealt with some of the aspects of Kim Philby, his very little known role as a Zionist spy, a Zionist mole in UK intelligence, as well as how that related to his long-term role as a Soviet mole in UK intelligence, which included things such as the link between his role in potentially doing red herrings and helping facilitate the King David Hotel bombing, it looks like. But Victor Rothschild potentially has a much, much bigger, much more extended role in relationship to his role at the highest levels of the British establishment well after Philby was outed. So that's crucial because it goes even into the establishment of I've said it before, the combination of the British pharmaceutical industry in relationship to things like biowarfare and Porton Downs, I think it's called, is where their biowarfare establishment is centered. And then also Victor Rothschild's apparent role at the epicenter of something like similar to the Epstein-Maxwell sexual compromise network in a more American way, that Victor Rothschild looked to be at the epicenter of the British versions of those kinds of scandals, especially in relationship to someone like Ted Heath, for example. Okay. Back to the text here, Israel and China from Silk Road to Innovation Highway, page 63. Quote, the university, we're talking about Hebrew University. The university has 6 campuses, 7 faculties, humanities, social sciences, law, mathematics and sciences, agriculture and food environment, medicine and dental medicine, and 14 schools. It has approximately 23,000 students, of which over 45,000 are postgraduates and some 83 research centers. The Hebrew University is among the top 50 universities in the world. It has a particularly strong reputation in the fields of mathematics, computer science, and business and economics. In 1964, the university created its Technology Transfer Bureau, Yesum Research Development Company, which is in charge of the commercialization of Hebrew University's intellectual property to private investors. Yesum enabled 9 companies to form based on its in-house technology in 2014. In the same year, 65 technology licensing agreements and about 600 technology-based assignments were concluded. Nearly 40% of all civilian scientific research in Israel is conducted at the Hebrew University. 7 Hebrew University researchers and alumni have received the Nobel Prize, including Daniel Kahneman in Economics 2002, David Gross in Physics 2004, Avram Hershko in Chemistry 2004, Aaron Ciechanover in Chemistry 2004, Robert Oman in Economics 2005, Roger Kornberg in Chemistry 2006, and Ada Yonath in Chemistry 2009. Among the university alumni, 3 were Israeli presidents, Ephraim Katzir, Yitzhak Navon, and Moshe Katsav. 3 more, Ehud Barak, Ariel Sharon, and Ehud Omer, were Israeli prime ministers. Numerous other alumni became leading CEOs, including Leo Apotheker, former CEO of HP and SAP, Orit Gadesh, former chairman of Bain & Company, and Eli Hurwitz, former CEO of Teva Pharmaceuticals. Unquote. End of that page, page 63. And by the way, those are all really crucial. We're going to have to return to actually a lot of, at the very least, Orit Gadesh in terms of Bain & Company. We still have not filled in the background of Romney in relationship to potentially this much bigger network, and Orit Gadesh there. And she's also, of course, former Israeli military intelligence officer operating there in terms of Bain & Company, the Boston relationship there. Remember Netanyahu, MIT, Boston Consulting Group, Bain & Company, the All AL, the focus, as we pointed out from the Seeds of Fire book, how all had a focus not just on Silicon Valley, but also on Route 128, I think it's called there, outside of Boston, the high technology corridor of the East Coast. And of course, Epstein's role in relationship to the Harvard and MIT is a big deal, of course. And just look at what Cornel West called Larry Summers, the Ariel Sharon of Harvard, and the pictures of Larry Summers with Epstein and all of that. But also then Eli Hurwitz, the former CEO of Teva Pharmaceuticals. There's a whole backstory of Teva Pharmaceuticals, because a lot has been made of the what's the name of the family? The big opiate family, Greg, that has been now sanctioned and sued, and who has a strong connection to donating in Israel.
Oh, the family? No, not Sackler.
The Sackler family. Thank you. Yes.
Oh, this is the Sackler family. Okay.
The Sackler family. And so there's this whole, it looks like Teva Pharmaceuticals, and it is an even potentially bigger facilitator of the opiate network. And there is a whole scenario in the background in relationship to the evolution of the COVID-19 pandemic, in relationship to fentanyl and opiate pathways, and Teva Pharmaceuticals. And I believe it was Teva Pharmaceuticals in relationship to, was it Hungary? I don't know. There's a whole thing there. And so that's, I just wanted to point that out, that Teva Pharmaceuticals is very, very little focused on as this crucial nodal point in a lot of these kinds of issues. But you know, for the Sacklers, for example, to be focused on by Democracy Now! As far as I know, Democracy Now! Has never dealt with Teva Pharmaceuticals, which is at the core of it's eminent. If things like Pegasus and NSO Group emanate from Unit 8200 and the cyber weaponry networks of the Israeli military intelligence structure, then something like Teva Pharmaceuticals in some way, at the very least, works in conjunction with the biological warfare component of the Israeli security state. And remember, as we pointed out, that the biography of Arnon Milchan points out that he was not just a nuclear intelligence agent of Lechem and of Israeli military intelligence, and produced the film for Oliver Stone on the assassination of the American President John Kennedy. But he was also identified in that biography as being the go-to procurer for the entirety of the Israeli weapons programs, NBC, as it's usually talked about, nuclear, biological, and chemical. And we touched on that a little bit in terms of Seeds of Fire, but I just want to remind people that for how much in certain aspects of alternative media that at least understand Milchan as a Israeli nuclear intelligence agent, it's beyond that. He was also the go-to guy, apparently, for the entirety of the Israeli weapons grouping to go to for missing pieces of what they were working. So that would also include biological and chemical. All right. Back to the book here. Let's see. Let's do a few more pages of this section. I know that this doesn't deal directly with China, but it's just the next chapter, and I feel like it's a good.
It's good
grounding.
to. I think it's good to get us background on some of these major universities and institutes as it is. Like, I think this type of background on the names and the kind of people who attend these universities, and as far as their influence. I mean, it's very interesting to me. It was Technion, correct? It has these. Obviously, it has branch at Cornell University, is also in China. So I feel like this is these. Even like the background of some of these universities, they are crucial to this combination of science and technology. I feel like this kind of background and with the names and the names of the universities and the names of the people who come from here and the types of work being done at these places and where they have branches as well, I think it's very useful. So,
okay, very good. And it may be that we have to do two sections to finish this book properly in order to not go too long today, but if you're down with it, then I'd like to complete this section because I agree with you. I think it's important backgrounding.
Let's do it.
All right. All right. Back to the text. We are now on page 64 of Israel and China from Silk Road to Innovation Highway by Lionel Friedfeld and Philippe Metoudi. All right. Weizmann Institute of Science. Quote, Chaim Weizmann, who subsequently became Israel's first president, founded the Daniel Seif Research Institute in Rehovot in 1934. It was renamed the Weizmann Institute in 1949. Weizmann was born in Belarus. He acquired British citizenship in 1910 and held it until 1948, when he became president of the new state. An accomplished biochemist, he developed the technique of creating acetone through bacterial fermentation. This was a major contribution to Britain in World War I and contributed to Weizmann's great stature and influence in Great Britain. In 1955, Weizmann Institute of Science developed WISAC, W-E-I-S-A-C, that's an acronym, the first modern computer in the Middle East and one of the world's first electronic computers. In 1959, the Institute created a technology transfer bureau, Yeda Research and Development Company, to promote its intellectual property to industrial applications. Among its successes are BioHep B, that's a registered trademark, it looks like, a recombinant hepatitis B vaccine, the world's first commercial solid lubricant based on spherical inorganic nanoparticles, and improved crop varieties in hybrid cultivars of cucumbers and melons. Today, the Weizmann Institute of Science offers only graduate and postgraduate courses. It has 5 faculties involved in the fields of mathematics and computer sciences, physics, chemistry, biochemistry, and biology. The Institute has more than 1,100 students, 700 doctoral and 400 postgraduate students, and more than 50 research centers. Weizmann Institute of Science has 3 Nobel Prize-winning professors, Ada Yonath in chemistry 2009, and Michael Levitt and Aria Warshel in chemical physics 2013. The Institute ranks among the top 50 academic institutions worldwide with particular strengths in the fields of computer science and chemistry. Unquote. End of that section. And we'll just quickly point out the name of Michael Levitt, who we've mentioned before. And we haven't yet actually done the deep dive that we were considering doing about the background of the apparent misinformation landscape of aspects of the severity of COVID and how it was being dealt with. And one name that popped up to us was Michael Levitt, who I believe is at Stanford now. But this is, I believe, the same Michael Levitt who's they're talking about here. unless I'm mistaken. This is Michael Levitt spelled with an Levitt. So we'll have to look into that and see if that's the same Michael Levitt, but that'd be interesting. All right, on to Tel Aviv University at the bottom of page 64 of Israel and China from Silk Road to Innovation Highway. Quote, Tel Aviv University. Tel Aviv University was created in 1956 when the Tel Aviv School of Law and Economics and the Institutes of Jewish Studies and Natural Sciences merged. Tel Aviv University now has 9 faculties: arts, engineering, exact sciences, humanities, law, life science, medicine, social sciences, management, and 7 schools: environmental studies, music, architecture, dental medicine, education, social work, international school. Tel Aviv University has more than 31,000 students, 3,300 doctoral students, and 130 research institutes. It regularly ranks among the top 50 academic institutions in the world, particularly in the field of computer science. Alumni include the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, Israel's first astronaut, Ilan Ramon, and Waze co-founders Yuri Levine and Ehud Shabtai. Unquote. End of that section. Remember, Waze is the big alternative to the sort of driving assistance map app, where it'll talk to you. They've even recorded voiceovers by like hip hop artist T-Pain and all of that. They're sort of seen as the funky version of Google Maps or something like that. All right, next section here, page 65 of Understanding Asia's relationship with of Israel and China from Silk Road to Innovation Highway. Understanding
real quick,
Asia's
Jeremy,
relationship with the Jewish state.
Real quick, I think it is the same Michael Levitt, Weizmann Institute and Stanford. So it is the same Michael Levitt.
Okay, well, thank you for checking that. All right, now we are on to, quote, Ben Gurion University of the Negev. David Ben Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, believed that the South would play a critical role in the destiny of the state, since this area, which is largely desert, covers 60% of Israeli territory. Ben Gurion University of the Negev was created in 1969 to help fulfill that vision. Today, the university has more than 20,000 students, of which 13,000 are undergraduates, 1,300 doctoral students, and 6,700 postgraduates. Ben Gurion University has 3 campuses in Beersheba and 2 in Sde Boker and Eilat. It has 5 faculties in sciences: health sciences, natural sciences, business management and humanities, and social sciences. And 6 schools: graduate studies, medical school, community health, pharmacy, medical laboratory sciences, continuing medical education. 8 research institutes and more than 61 interdisciplinary research centers, including the Solar Energy Center and Institute for Water Research, highlight the university's strong emphasis on research. BGN Technologies, Ben Gurion University's Technology Transfer Bureau, monetizes the university's intellectual property. Ben Gurion University ranks as one of the top in the world in the fields of water and solar research. Alumni include former Minister of Finance, Science and Foreign Affairs, Silvan Shalom, and former CEO of Israel airline El Al, Eliezer Shekedi. Unquote. End of that section. And the one thing I want to point out is that they talk about how Ben Gurion himself, the first prime minister of Israel, which will of course relate to the question of Kennedy and the Israeli nuclear bomb, identified this southern part, this desert part of the designated Israeli territory as a crucial one to the future of the country. And what's not said here, of course, is that it's in the Negev, in this region, that the Israeli bomb was created, and facilitated by someone like Shimon Peres and the father, in many ways, of the facilitator of the early days of Lakam, and the first handler of Arnon Milchan as a designated Israeli military intelligence agent under the Lechem or Lakam, the Bureau of Scientific Liaison or Relations. I can't remember which one it is. In terms of his work liaising with the United States in terms of the smuggling of things like nuclear trigger Krytrons from Southern California. But then we can begin to see that there's probably an informational component to liaising, i.e. espionage, in terms of, all right, now this, we also then, if we're in Lechem and Lakam and we're Shimon Peres and Arnon Milchan, then we then have to cover up the very likely role of these interests, these Israeli military intelligence interests, in removing an American president that was firmly pushing back against Ben Gurion et al.'s push towards an Israeli nuclear weapon, and the whole potential key. That was not the only motive. It doesn't look like there was intersecting networks. There was a more American-centric network that also wanted Kennedy out. But this Israeli military intelligence network is very crucial, it looks like, in the operations. Most obviously seen in the apparent key role of the Meyer Lansky organized crime syndicate in the overall operation, and then also someone like James Jesus Angleton as potentially the key American handler of the operation, both the intelligence legend side, i.e. the Lee Harvey Oswald patsy part of the operation, but then holding it together with the actual facilitation of the military hit operation. I would say that Angleton is at the epicenter of that. And so that's why we'll dig some more in on Angleton within the dimensions of Antedote Deepcore Text. But the Negev region is obviously very substantial in terms of its influence in Israeli history, but also by Israel in the contemporary world, which would even go through and up to something like what happened at Ground Zero, Southern Manhattan on September 11th, and obviously in the wake of that. So I just want to put that out there as a missing component about what's not being said about why Negev, turned out to be even more consequential than it's being said in this text about Ben Gurion's acknowledgement of it as such. There's a couple books too, and we have these books listed, whole series of books and papers listed on our Clubhouse Antedote Deepcore Club page. And maybe, Greg, what we should do is that we should find a place on another one of our platforms to publish the entire list that we have up now of all of these sources, because it's, as we've gone through the years of the Antedote, we've published probably hundreds, if not well over 1,000 of internet link sources that we've either referred to or that we think are related to what we're talking about, or document what we're talking about. But then there's a whole bunch of more white paper and book sources that we can't always link to in terms of being able to read to, and that's actually some of the focus of why we created Antedote Deepcore Text and what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we have what I'd like to think. I believe personally that we might have, the two of us, between like the consortium of links and sources that we've used over the years on our program, perhaps the most diverse listing of sources and citations of pretty much anybody out there in the realm that does like serious research and work of like within of this type of work that's out there. I would put it up against anybody. And then on top of that, this whole Clubhouse, it's like, we could fill I mean, we only have so much time, unfortunately, to do recordings and readings. But I mean, I agree with you about getting this list of books and lists of texts up for people to really look into for themselves. I mean, it is a very vast group and it's not even the whole list of like things that we'd like to read from and comment on in the future. But I mean, it's a very vast list of books and texts and volumes that related to a number of different topics that we focus on, that we've made the focus of our program over the last several years. So definitely, yeah, getting that out there and one by one over time. I mean, it's going to take a while to get into all of these texts, and also the list is growing as well. So we're finding articles that we've looked at that we want to add to the list aren't officially on this. There's a lot there, and a lot that I think people who are really into this kind of research and understanding, taking deep dives into these topics would really benefit a lot from us as well as and so definitely we should most certainly get that list out there for people to access and just keep following up on it, because there's so much out there. You never run out of resources to run into and learn from. I mean, it's just amazing how just how much you think you know, and then there's so much more out there, so many layers, so many things. So definitely getting this list out there to people to access and be able to look at for themselves. I think, yeah, very much so. And we've got a lot of reading to do here in the future, but our goal is, God willing, to get through all of it at some point. So.
Yeah, and maybe we can actually just even put the link to our Antedote Deepcore Text Clubhouse in the description of the show. And I'm not sure whether people who are not on Clubhouse can see the club page fully and see what it says. But maybe we could even post it in a comment or something like that, because it is the case that basically all of our quoted sources from our previous shows on the Antidote over the years have been published. We publish them in a combination of places, both on YouTube, either in the description or on pinned comments, or when we were back on No Lies Radio. A lot of those have our previous long source lists, and then our Patreon page also has our source lists on that. But we've never published this list. I think it's one of the best lists that I've ever seen in terms of book sources and specific white paper sources that really covers the large entirety of the issues that we've dealt with. And that's why we call it deep core text. It's from an American perspective. And so there's a heavy focus on that. And there's a heavy focus on the U.S.-Israel relationship, and then this Israeli technology and espionage angle. And I believe that people will find a whole bunch of sources there that fill in a lot of the wide pieces here. And so two of the books I believe that we have on that list are Israel and the Bomb by Avner Cohen, who I believe it's actually the book about the Kennedy assassination by Michael Collins Piper, Final Judgment. He refers to this book as being crucial in the evolution of his awareness about how important the Israeli nuclear bomb was in terms of surrounding the American foreign policy and Kennedy and all of that. So that's Israel and the Bomb by Avner Cohen. And then another book is titled The Bomb in the Basement, How Israel Went Nuclear and What That Means for the World by Michael Karpin. And then there's other books. There's some very interesting. Ed Matson has another book. I can't remember what it's titled. I don't have it in physical copy, but it's listed on our Antedote Deepcore Text. And that's a very interesting book we should read from too. Okay. All right. Back to the text today. Israel and China from Silk Road to Innovation Highway by Lionel Friedfeld and Philippe Metoudi, Understanding Asia's Relationship with the Jewish State. And we just finished up Ben Gurion University of the Negev. We're now at the bottom of page 65. Quote, Bar Ilan University. Bar Ilan University was created in 1955. Today it has more than 26,000 students, of which approximately 17,000 are undergraduates, 2,000 doctoral students, and 6,800 postgraduates. Bar-Ilan University has 9 faculties and more than 10 research centers. It also houses Israel's largest nanotechnology center. The university's technology transfer bureau, Bar-Ilan Research and Development Company, BIRAD, B-I-R-A-D. And by the way, that sounds like, right, that's very similar to the bird and the bard from the American-Israel relationship and Kissinger and all of that. All right, back to the text. The quote, the university's technology transfer bureau, Bar-Ilan Research and Development Company, BIRAD, monetizes Bar-Ilan's intellectual property to private investors. Bar-Ilan University, and especially its computer sciences program, ranks among the top 100 institutions in the world. University alumni include former Minister of Justice Tzipi Livni and Israeli politician Michael Ben-Ari. And then, moving on. Leading
was that first name Tzipi Livni?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, she's one of the more influential figures in Israeli politics, and one of the more vocally one of the less vocally tolerant ones of the more outspoken as far as like opposition to quote unquote opposition to Netanyahu. I believe opposition to Netanyahu and Likud go, but not much better in terms of like at least certainly rhetorically so.
Yeah, she's seen as part of the moderate groups or the liberal Zionist politicians of Israel, and I believe that she has a background in Mossad actually as a human intelligence Israeli operative rather than through high technology stuff. But I'm not sure. She may also have this. She may also have a high technology background too. Sorry. All right. So we're finishing off this sector from this chapter from Israel and China, from Silk Road to Innovation Highway by Lionel Friedfeld and Philippe Metoudi, Understanding Asia's Relationship with the Jewish State. Page 66, quote, leading Israeli research centers, Volcani Institute of Agricultural Research. Yitzhak Volcani founded the Institute of Agricultural Research in 1921 in the city of Ben Shemen as an agricultural experiment station. In 1932, the station was relocated to Rehovot in the Tel Aviv area. When Volcani passed away in 1951, the Israeli Minister of Agriculture assumed the management of the center, renaming it in honor of its founder. The Volcani Institute of Agricultural Research later moved to Beit Dagan, also in the Tel Aviv area, and became part of the Agricultural Research Organization, ARO, under the umbrella of the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. ARO has 6 institutes and 3 campuses under management. The Volcani Institute specializes in agriculture under arid conditions, irrigation using recycled wastewater and desalination, freshwater aquaculture under water shortages, enhancement of crop optimization and production. The center is active in 6 areas, including plant protection and sciences, animal sciences, soil, water, and environmental sciences, agricultural engineering, and food sciences. The Institute of Agricultural Research provides training to graduate students in cooperation with Israel's leading universities. It also aids agricultural workers in developing countries under the leadership of the Mashav, M-A-S-H-A-V, the acronym. In addition, or maybe a program name, through its Technology Transfer Bureau, Kidum, ARO monetizes its intellectual property to third-party investors. Israel Institute for Biological Research. Prime Minister Ben-Gurion's science advisor and head of research and development at the Ministry of Defense, Professor Ernest Bergman, created the Israel Institute for Biological Research in 1952. The institute, which operates under the jurisdiction of the Prime Minister's office, specializes in vaccines and pharmaceuticals, protein and enzymes, medical diagnostics, biotechnology, and environmental detectors. Its Technology Transfer Bureau, Life Science Research Israel commercializes the research center's intellectual property. Unquote. End of that section. And I just want to point out that this is reinstantiates that as I said before, that the questions of pharmaceuticals and vaccines and biotechnology and medical technology of all sorts directly, and this key institute, Israel Institute for Biological Research, which is, I also believe it's where the biowarfare lab is attached, and this is also very similar in the United States, and I think this is sort of a lot how it's done, that it's dual use, dual function, right? Where military and civilian sectors are always sort of right behind the civilian research is the military research. But this is, of course, as we pointed out over and over, at a very high pitch in terms of Israel, because for a couple of reasons. It's an ongoing military garrison state at home, i.e., it's reinforcing its long-term military occupation of a peoples at home, Palestinian peoples, but also because it is very deeply involved internationally in terms of military operations, and has a full conscription model where all Israelis, basically, except for a few exceptions, religious exceptions sometimes, have to serve in the military. And by the way, it's very interesting, at the U.S. Senate, it looks like maybe the Armed Services Committee just pushed through a proposal to force American women to sign up for the draft in an American context, and so that begins to feel like the Israeli model to some extent, and in first place, and this is a whole nother conversation, but the draft per se is an un-American activity, I believe, and the country is founded on a volunteer army of the citizen soldier. And it's the same thing with our politics. It's gotten overrun by the professional class in these realms of, so specifically military and politics, where the core of it is meant to be the citizen, the revolving citizen who steps up to the plate in both of these sectors. And that, I believe, is the best of the American tradition. And now we're heading into this much more conscripted, forced aspect of sort of under equalization of the genders of women having to sign up for the draft too. But this combination in Israel of it being an ongoing military garrison state with an apartheid function at home in terms of certain military police functions, and then its total drafting and conscription of its citizens, so that basically all of the companies that come out of Israel are necessarily created by a veteran of their military, right? That's just sort of how it is. And so that combination makes it sort of more intense and more supercharged in relationship to the very more regular military-civilian relationship around the world. And I just had wanted to point out that this the foundation of this Israel Institute for Biological Research, and saying that it specializes in vaccines and pharmaceuticals, which are supposedly civilian sector tool sets primarily. This all originated out of Prime Minister Ben-Gurion's science advisor and head of research and development at the Ministry of Defense, Professor Ernest Bergman. Okay, and so this is where in 1952, this is where this comes out of the Israeli military. All right. And then go for it.
I was just going to say what you were describing there with this push with the Senate I believe you said Armed Services Committee was it's like some Israeli influence into the perhaps Israeli inspired influence into what we hear so much about with the America woke militarism going on. So
All right. And so we have almost finished with this section here, but this is crucial because this is going to go over, we finished with the key loci of research institutions, and now it's going to go into the IDF special units and programs. And so we're going to hear some names that we have talked about a good amount, and then some other ones that we have not talked about that much. And so this will be good to finish up this section, and then we'll decide whether we want to do one more section before we close up for today. All right. Page 67 of Israel and China, From Silk Road to Innovation Highway by Lionel Friedfeld and Philippe Metoudi, Understanding Asia's Relationship with the Jewish State. Quote, Israel Defense Forces Specialized Units and Programs. The Israel Defense Forces technology units form a critical component of Israel's innovation capability. As a country facing constant threats from its neighbors, defense is of even greater importance than in many other countries. Israel has put a high priority on innovation in defense technology to maintain a competitive edge. Remember the name of the book about the Talpiot program? Israel's Edge, I think it's called, isn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah, okay. All right. Back to the text, page 67 of Israel and China, From Silk Road to Innovation Highway. Quote, Momron Unit. Momron, an acronym for Center of Computing and Information Systems, is the Israel Defense Forces IDF Central Unit dealing with computing systems. The unit was formed in 1959, hosting several data processing units, such as the Inventory Processing Center and Manpower Computer Center. Today, Momron provides data processing services for the IDF. Its responsibilities include management of the IDF's internal intranet, networked systems, and integration. Considered one of the best computer programming institutes in the world, Momron created a dedicated school called Basmach in 1994. In 2007, the Momron Association was launched to provide its members with networking opportunities. Momron alumni are the human resources backbone of Israel's high-tech industry. Many have become influential CEOs of large Israeli corporations, such as the former CEO of Bank Leumi, Galia Mower, and the CEO of Matrix IT, Moti Gutman. Unquote. All right, just quickly, you remember the connection of Bank Leumi, which was just mentioned. There's a lot of connections there, of course, actually, because you go in the background of I believe the TV show Homeland, which was, Obama talked about as one of his favorites. That's an Israeli TV show, then brought in to be redone in an American context, a very crucial Obama era TV show. We've mentioned before about how there's a couple crucial post 9/11 TV shows that really deal with the quote unquote war on terror in post 9/11 United States, and the Bush era and sort of cultural one is the TV show 24 featuring Kiefer Sutherland. And then the Obama era and then culturally centered one would be Homeland, featuring Claire Danes as the main actress in that one. And I believe that the original creator of Homeland, I believe this is correct, was the son of a key Bank Leumi executive. But Bank Leumi also is where Donald Trump's key banker at Deutsche Bank. And this is going to start coming up again because there's much more focus again on this question of what was Christopher Wray as FBI director doing in relationship to this alleged background check and investigation into quote unquote who owns Kavanaugh and what Kavanaugh did or did not do. It looks like it was just an operation to pipe all of the tips into the White House and then sit on them while Kavanaugh got through his Senate confirmation hearing process. And of course, in the background there is former Justice Anthony Kennedy. People should go listen to our show about that. And then Justice Kennedy's son, Justin Kennedy, is at the epicenter of the Deutsche Banking functions, a unit that represented Donald Trump's last man standing in terms of banks operating in an American context that would continue to lend to him. And there's that very strange video of then Justice Kennedy on his way out, doing a double take, walking next to then President Donald Trump, and a very interesting moment. It almost looks like a sort of a declaration of compromise or something like that. But this very tight relationship there at Deutsche Bank is crucial. And the reason why I brought this up is that if you go look in the background there, the woman who was the head of that unit, Rosemary Vrablick, was the story is that she, on a train ride from down to Manhattan, I think from, upstate New York or somewhere, basically randomly sat next to a Bank Leumi executive, and then that's how she entered into the high finance and banking sector, was via a random connection with a Bank Leumi executive. So one of the other books that is on our list in Antedote Deepcore Text is the book Dark Towers, Deutsche Bank, Donald Trump, and an Epic Tale of Destruction by David Enrich, the finance editor at the New York Times. And of course, Deutsche Bank has this very infamous history, having helped finance the camp at Auschwitz, the modern Russian mob-based Russian laundromat of facilitating the washing of billions of dollars in money, relationship to Jeffrey Epstein's financing, and then of course Donald Trump, but also, as we've talked about before, this Roman Abramovich, this question of the FinCEN documents that came out showing the movement of money that then showed up as almost $100 million seed investment by Roman Abramovich into these sort of legalized ethnic cleansing operations in Jerusalem. In the case of Abramovich, he financed Elad to the tune of $100 million in seed funding, and a lot of that money was exposed in relationship to Deutsche Bank, Department of Treasury FinCEN files, I believe. So there is that connection additionally. All right, so that's Deutsche Bank, and we will touch back on that. I just wanted to remind folks of the connection to Bank Leumi of Rosemary Vrablick, Trump's key Deutsche Bank banker, and then that connection to the question still lingering about the Kennedys. And remember, there's an intergenerational aspect of the question of Justice Anthony Kennedy, his father very much related to what looks to be the politicized mob networks operating in California, specifically out of Sacramento, but also operating statewide. And so then there's this question of these intergenerational mobbed up scenarios that surround now the question of both Kennedys. And then we might also suggest the question of Kavanaugh's father, Justice Kavanaugh's father, not only who financed his debt or his spending, those are very important questions too, but also his father's deep involvement in relationship to the Lauder, i.e. Estee Lauder, but someone like Ronald Lauder and his family's involvement in cosmetics. And Justice Kavanaugh's father was a crucial operative of the board of the cosmetics board, cosmetics industry board in the Americas. Thus, has a very obvious deep relationship with the Lauders, and Ronald Lauder, of course, at the epicenter of a lot of these questions, from his role in the World Jewish Congress, his role in relationship to the heights of power to Putin's Russia, but also his relationship to the quote-unquote privatization of the World Trade Center and the shifting of the World Trade Center into the hands of Larry Silverstein, the man who Benjamin Netanyahu called every single weekend for years on end up through the September 11th operation in Lower Manhattan. So that is a crucial connection to all of this, as we pointed out, from 9/11 to 11/9. All right.
Yes, sir. And even one more thing is even Anthony Kennedy being appointed by President Reagan makes sense in this context when you consider Reagan being like an intersection between Hollywood and the more mobbed up aspects of Hollywood culture and, of course, the center of power politics through something like the Council for National Policy. So it all kind of, even like from a long-term perspective, you can see the kind of a bind tying between like these types of characters.
A great point, Greg. I had forgotten that Kavanaugh had been originally appointed under Reagan. That makes a lot of sense, right? Reagan.
Well, I was referring to Anthony Kennedy.
Oh, to Anthony Kennedy. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So, of course, Kavanaugh being his direct predecessor, and the commonality, of course, Reagan coming up through like some type of intersection of Hollywood and the mob, and then, of course, the what we were talking about with even Justice Kennedy's father. So there you go.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that. And because, of course, the California mob-connected questions of the presidents are of Ronald Reagan and then Richard Nixon. And those both pop up in relationship, I believe, to the show that we did about the background of this Citizens United network being directly going through then Justice Anthony Kennedy, who wrote the lead. He was the lead on the opinion of Citizens United, which basically legalized political money corruption, even from an international background. And so I think also then it's also at this point important to mention the recent indictment and arrest of key Trump long-term associate friend, and then also the man in charge of the inauguration money, Thomas Barack, who along with Trump and Epstein were labeled to be the three musketeers in the 80s, late 80s, I think, Manhattan social life. All right, so and he has just been indicted and arrested for being an agent of a foreign government, in this case, the United Arab Emirates. But then if you look in the background there in terms of the severity of the money, there are some things that we still haven't fully unpacked about the 11/9 operation that deal with whistleblower Andy Kawaja, which talked about how potentially micro payments and or a series of small contributions were used to funnel in what otherwise would have been even potentially maybe illegal even under Citizens United and our current campaign laws in the United States, but hundreds of millions of dollars of dark foreign money into the 2016 campaigns. So there's a whole thing in the background there that there's a lot actually behind the Thomas Barack arrest and indictment that we will explore. All right, finishing up here, Greg, we will finish this section around these units, these special units, and then we will call it a day for this recording of Antedote Deepcore Text. But again, we are reading from Israel and China, from Silk Road to Innovation Highway by Lionel Friedfeld and Philippe Metoudi, Understanding Asia's Relationship with the Jewish State. And we are now on top of page 68. Quote, 8200 unit. The 8200 unit, created in 1952, is responsible for collecting signal intelligence. It is the largest unit in the IDF and is comparable to the United States National Security Agency, collecting military intelligence from diverse sources. Since its inception, this unit has been providing the manpower that enabled the creation of the Israeli high-tech industry. 8200 alumni are founders and CEOs of numerous Israeli technology companies, including Checkpoint, ICQ, NIS systems, Gilat, audio codes, and Easy Chip. Talpiot program. The Talpiot program, created in 1979, enables its recruits to pursue a university degree in the sciences while serving the IDF in a research and development position.
I couldn't help but notice Talpiot in 1979, so there's that key year once again.
Yes, and there's a theme that we keep coming back to is that this combination of Jerusalem Conference, Talpiot program, and then this Iran operation, all surrounding this 1979 period, also and then throwing in Eisenberg,
and the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. So so much happening.
Yes. It's interesting in my presentation to the Deep Truth Conference about Talpiot and Unit 8200, the global project for kill switch domination or something like that was the subtitle of it. The one section I dealt with specifically 1979 as this year, including all of these things, including the launching of Talpiot. And we'll return again to Talpiot specifically, especially since in the context of September 11th and some of the documents that we've read from that talk about the Jewish Board of Governors as having been Jewish Agency Board of Governors having been identified as by elements of U.S. counterterrorism and counterintelligence, including within the FBI aspects of the Able Danger program, as having been part of the Israel-connected angle on the September 11th operation, especially in a New York context, and that the then head of the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency for Israel was a man named Eitan Wertheimer, who comes from a family that has started some of these crucial Israeli industrial-based companies, and one of their companies called Iskar, I think it's called, and I believe that's the one that was bought by Warren Buffett. And then what we disclose in one of our from 9/11 to 11/9 programs, and people can go back to those and find the list of sources there and find where we found that it's identified that the key lieutenant to the Wertheimer family and their technology operations, industrial company operations, was a man named Dan Sharon. And then I cross-sourced that with the book on Talpiot, Israel's Edge, and it turns out, yes, Dan Sharon is the key lieutenant of the Talpiot program and helped launch it. And so that's why we at that point said, here is a direct connection to you, where you could say that under the context of what U.S. counterintelligence, counterterrorism, suppressed sources have said about who helped do 9/11, you could say that there's a key connection back to the Talpiot program. So that's one thing to mention.
And then you link that all together with Wertheimer and Bernard Kerik, and even things like Giuliani being like this cyber liaison in the lead up, right in the lead up to both the lead up to and the aftermath of the 2016 election. Yeah, you can see seen a pattern developing with Giuliani regularly traveling to Israel in this time period after the election, and of course, so there's it seems that it's not all direct, but you can see a pattern at play.
Yes, and thank you for bringing in that element, because there is those direct ties of the money, because the other individuals that are mentioned in terms of that Able Danger U.S. counterintelligence counterterrorism document was not just Jewish Agency Board of Governors Eitan Wertheimer, but Bernard Kerik himself. They even mentioned the wife of Bernard Kerik, and then these connecting money ties too. And so Kerik was indicted for some of this stuff that's being talked about in these ways. So I appreciate you connecting those dots. And people might want to go back to those programs we did about Trump and his real estate the ground zero connections to Trump. That's some crucial research that we put together.
Yeah, and of course, Kerik pardoned by Trump and now acting in right-wing media as one type of person who's going to help save the country. I mean, we'll just have to have our voices as loud as possible so that people don't listen to these sources when it comes to what's good for our future. But anyway, I digress.
All right, here we are back on page 68 of Israel and China from Silk Road to Innovation Highway by Lionel Friedfeld, Philippe Metoudi, Understanding Asia's Relationship with the Jewish State. Page 68, the Talpiot Program. The Talpiot Program, created in 1979, enables its recruits to pursue a university degree in the sciences while serving the IDF in a research and development position. Alumni of the program included founders of Compugen, Eli Mintz, Simchon Feigler, and Amir Natan. One of the co-founders of Checkpoint Software, Maurice Nacht, and Chief Technology Officer of Trusteer, Amit Klein. 9900 Unit. The 9900 Unit, almost unknown to the general public, is a special intelligence unit that gathers valuable visual information from maps to satellite images. The unit's members analyze route movement and field data. The unit develops its advanced technology such as sensors and augmented reality devices internally. Vision Maps digital 3D photography civilian application, one of the unit's success stories, was acquired by Israel's Rafael and South Korea's SK Group in 2013 for US $150 million, unquote. All right, and that's the end of that segment. Greg, do you want to just quickly mention in relationship to Unit 9900 that is something that we've bumped into briefly when we were dealing with the background of Paul Jay's Real News Network? Is that what it's called? Real News Network? I believe that's what it's called.
Yes, and I'm forgetting the exact specifics, but it was Paul Jay, former head of the Real News Network. I think he has his own media operation now, and I'm forgetting the exact specifics of that connection. But we were going into like the background of some of the people affiliated with the Real News Network, and there was a
it was his co-founder, Rabbi David Ostreicher. Rabbi David Ostreicher was a co-founder, apparently, sort of more behind the scenes with Paul Jay. These are both from a Canadian angle. And we identified the background of Ostreicher as having been working as a journalist, potentially, in Angola, right?
And Angola was a key battleground in Africa during the Cold War, with the American-backed Zavimbi versus, I believe, forces that were backed by a combination of the Soviet Union and more physically by Cuba. And so, it brings in a connection to like this African realm or of the Cold War, and it just raises some questions for both of us about like the more or less looking at like the Cold War as like this controlled conflict of. But yeah, there's a lot there with that background, and directly, basically out of Unit 9900. And for us, it raised a lot of questions.
Well, the connection direct. I just wanted to explain the 9900 connection was we found. Then after we found this background of Rabbi David Ostreicher having been involved in the co-founding of the Real News Network with Paul Jay, we then went to his actual biography and the work that he's doing today. And one of the things that he was working on was supporting a foundation, a nonprofit organization or something like that, that operated in an Israeli context of helping facilitated people of Israeli teenagers, it looked like, who had autism, I think, different psychological, spectrum stuff in terms of autism, and helping facilitate them into specific map analysis programs in the Unit 9900. And so that's where what we put together. And I would just point people to, on our YouTube channel, there is a clip from the show where we went over this that is probably the most attacked clip most attacked video on our entire history, was the exposing of this background of the foundation of the Real News Network.
Yeah, it's either that or going after Jimmy Dore and Aaron Mate for their coverage of Russiagate, quote unquote. But and of course, then that whole connection with children, with teenagers, that brings you back to the alleged mastermind of the bomb plot, of the threats that the American Jewish community centers as well. So there's a lot there.
Oh, that's a great point, and we'll have to return to that. The Michael Kadar is said to have a similar kind of autistic developmental disorder of some sort. That's a very interesting observation. I had not did. I mean, maybe you'd said that before. Maybe we talked about that before, but that's a very interesting observation, Greg. All right. Well, I guess that's it for this edition of the Antedote Deepcore Text. We've been reading from Israel and China, from Silk Road to Innovation Highway by Lionel Friedfeld and Philippe Metoudi, Understanding Asia's Relationship with the Jewish State. There's a few more segments from chapter 7 and 6, actually, 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10 that are all shorter than this one was, that we will cover in our next Antedote Deepcore Text segment in relation to Israel and China. But until next time, thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Antedote, we out.